We leave you this Sunday morning along the Yellowstone River at Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming.
I want to say that out of all the destruction that's going to happen to planet Earth and all the obstacles upon to the planet Earth and into planet Earth, including the humans, and this has been really, really tough for me because I am one that can understand the full scope of what it means whenever someone says, wow, the end of the world is coming, the end of the world is coming. In which I understand and realize that we've been taught that just about all our lives, or I have. I'm at the age of 63, that the end days is here. The end days is here. It's what the preachers like to preach on, is the end days. But whenever you get to looking and seeing so much stuff that's going on that goes beyond just a preacher in behind a pulpit, and identifying that, wow, we really are approaching the end of civilization as we know it. It really hits home whenever I see nature in its fullest, and in identifying that one day even this will come to an end too as well. It's so sad.
I'm Jane Pauley. Please join us when our trumpet sounds again next Sunday morning.
It is so sad.
I'm Margaret Brennan in Washington, and this week on Face the Nation,
Here's
we'll
Margaret.
get a new poll on where the presidential race stands in the final weeks before the election, plus new concerns over disaster funding after two major hurricanes hit the Southeast in recent weeks. Vice President Kamala Harris returned to North Carolina for a second time in 2 weeks, packing supplies for hurricane victims and campaigning in the all-important battleground state still cleaning up from Hurricane Helene. And on the heels of Hurricane Milton slicing through Florida last week, communities across 6 states now face a huge price tag to rebuild. We'll get the latest from Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas. Meanwhile, as former President Trump tries to make the storms a liability for his opponent,
Biden and Harris have done a horrible job on North Carolina and some of the other ones.
we'll check in with House Speaker Mike Johnson on disaster relief, the campaign, and more. Florida Congressman Maxwell Frost will also join us. And as the campaign enters the home stretch, we'll take the temperature of voters in a new CBS poll and get their thoughts on the future of the country in a focus group interview. It's all just ahead on Face the Nation. Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. With just 23 days until Election Day, large portions of the Southeast are in recovery mode, and presidential candidates are campaigning from coast to coast to get out the vote. Our new CBS News poll shows the race for the White House remains a toss-up, with Vice President Harris up just 3 points over former President Donald Trump nationwide, 51% to 48%. That's 1 point tighter from last month. Among voters in the 7 battleground states that will decide this election, it's just a 1 point difference, 50 to 49. Meanwhile, repair and cleanup efforts are underway in both Florida and North Carolina, where more than 260 deaths have been blamed on 2 major hurricanes. President Biden is in Florida this morning surveying the damage. Vice President Harris will hold a rally later in North Carolina. And we begin this morning with Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Welcome back to Face the Nation.
Good morning, Margaret. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Secretary, you oversee FEMA. There is still 7 weeks left in hurricane season. FEMA's director says they've already used nearly half of the $20 billion in disaster relief Congress allocated to them. But the Speaker of the House says FEMA has plenty of resources. They've been slow to respond, and that FEMA hasn't actually distributed the money. Can you clear that up?
Margaret, FEMA has the money to address the immediate needs of individuals impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. But we need Congress to act swiftly to fund FEMA and specifically its disaster relief fund, because hurricane season is not over, and also seasons are less and less important now given the effects of climate change and the increasing gravity and frequency of extreme weather events. And I should say, FEMA has not been slow at all. It already has distributed more than $470 million in relief to individuals impacted by Hurricane Helene. I take great pride, and this nation should take great pride, in the extraordinary work of our FEMA personnel and all first responders.
So this is obligated versus distributed. That's where you two are sort of disagreeing with each other, but it seems. But before Hurricane Milton hit, you said October 2nd, we do not have the funds. FEMA doesn't have the funds to make it through the season and what is imminent. So if another hurricane hits before the election, are there funds to deal with that kind of emergency situation?
We will address the immediate impacts, but remember, immediate impacts speak of immediate needs, meals, potable water, and the like. But also we have to ensure that individuals can recover from these extreme disasters, such as rebuilding their homes, repairing damage, and the like. And so we need Congress to act swiftly to fund what should be a nonpartisan, apolitical phenomenon, and that is providing relief to all individuals with respect to the impacts of these extreme weather events.
So immediate versus rebuilding. So you could wait until after the election. Or, do you know how much you'll need?
We don't know.
Okay.
We are still, for example, assessing the damage from Hurricane Milton, which is of historic strength, and it also led to approximately 27 different tornadoes. So we don't know the impact. We don't know what's coming tomorrow, whether it's another hurricane, a tornado, a fire, an earthquake. We have to be ready, and it is not good government to be dependent on a day-to-day existence as opposed to appropriate planning.
We've seen some dangerous misinformation being amplified online. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis hit back hard at some of these claims that if you got help from the federal government, somehow they'd seize your assets in his state. FEMA has been trying to counteract some of these lies as well. Are you concerned when you see this and how widespread it is, that it's a preview of what's to come with the upcoming U.S. election as well, attempts to manipulate people?
Incredibly concerned, and the misinformation, I should say it's disinformation, false information deliberately spread to impact people's behavior and perceptions, it is extremely pernicious. We have individuals in need of assistance who are entitled to assistance who aren't seeking it because of the false information.
Who's driving it?
Well, I'll tell you what we need. We need individuals, elected officials, people who have the platform to really debunk this false information, and we're not seeing enough of that. And I find that to be incredibly irresponsible, and irresponsible to the people who are survivors of these extreme weather events.
You have a big portfolio at Homeland Security, and of course the U.S. border is part of that. Border crossings are now at a low for the Biden presidency. But our CBS polling shows 65% of Trump voters believe the Biden administration is trying to intentionally increase the number of migrants at the border. And among the people who do believe that, 3/4 of them say it's because the administration wants them to vote. And the Speaker of the House just told us that he thinks non-citizens are going to vote, even though this is already illegal under established law. What mechanisms can you tell the public about that exist to prevent this from happening?
So what a powerful example of disinformation. There is no facts underlying these assertions. They are extremely damaging. It causes people to lose confidence in the integrity of the election system, and we need people in positions of authority to actually communicate accurate information to the voting public. The numbers that we are experiencing now at the border are actually lower than they were at this time of year in 2019. And so it's not just over the last 3 years, but well before them in the pre-COVID times. And the notion that we in law enforcement have sought to intentionally allow individuals to cross the border illegally for the purpose of voting is preposterous, and everyone should condemn that rhetoric. Everyone, regardless of party affiliation.
So, on the issue of the actions you've taken to bring these border crossings down, this was President Biden's presidential pout.
You have to admit that propaganda has always been out in the broad perspective of the public. But it hasn't been until basically all these devices has come into existence regarding social media and people being able to openly discuss things on social media, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, that the propaganda machine has basically been cranked up. And is there a way to tone it down or eliminate that type of rhetoric, that type of propaganda going out that is basically totally inaccurate? Probably not completely, but I'm going to tell you where the stem of that begins. It don't begin necessarily with the devices that you hold in your hand. The stem of it begins with a person's heart and their integrity in wanting to make sure that the information that they share with people or the information that they give out on these channels is in fact as accurate as they could possibly be. And if it's not accurate, whenever you're putting out information, you need to express to the public, now this is stuff that we cannot verify, or this is stuff that we only heard that is secondary information, but this is the rhetoric that's out there regarding this particular subject matter or topic, that whatever that you're trying to put out there too. So because people are not explicit in what they're talking about, in the subject matters that they're talking about, it leaves a broad perspective of imaginations to run wild. And it just goes to show you that a lie can travel twice as fast as the truth. In other words, bad information can travel twice as fast as good sound information, because by and large, people love darkness rather than they love light. Light is the formation of truth. Darkness is the formation of lies. So it begins with the person. It begins with the heart. It begins with the integrity of that person and what that person is willing to put out there, and how that person is willing to put that out there to determine whether or not this is the God's gospel, or if this is basically a bunch of rumors, that we're putting this out there as a rumor and you should accept it or listen to it as a rumor rather than listening to it as it being the gospel. And a lot of that has to do with the people, the individuals that's handling all this stuff, that's deliberately putting out false information, propaganda, that's making it that much more chaotic. Well, go back to the heart of the Bible, go back to the very core of origin, towards who is the author of lies, who is the author of confusion. It's not God, and it's not godly people, not true godly people, But the true author of confusion and the true author of lies is Satan and Satan's people. And whenever you have a planet that's more full of bad people than you have good people, you're going to have a planet full of chaos. Now that's my opinion about it. It didn't cost you nothing to hear that. But that's my opinion about all the false information that's been spewed just within the past. It's really accelerated since COVID, but it was already out there, like they're talking about here. It was already out there way before COVID ever hit. It just wasn't quite as much of it, and it wasn't quite as noticeable as what it is today.
Power. He's essentially disqualifying most of those who are entering illegally from being able to get asylum. This was meant to be a temporary policy change. So you took this without having to go to Congress and change the law, in short.
We took it after Congress failed to take the enduring step
Right.
of legislation, which was bipartisan in nature.
But just in doing that, by doing this through presidential power, aren't you essentially doing what Republicans said was possible throughout, which was with the stroke of a pen, President Biden could stop all of this?
No, and remember where we were. We were enforcing Title 42 of the Public Health Authority until May of last year. We then sought from Congress additional funding, additional Border Patrol agents, additional Homeland Security investigations personnel. They did not fund the Department of Homeland Security to enhance our border security. We sought that funding again rejected. The bipartisan group of senators actually presented
Right.
the most dramatic change in legislation in over 20 years. Congress was poised to pass it, and then politics got in the way. Some people would prefer the problem to persist than deliver a solution for the American people. The president acted. And remember, we had to build the capacity to implement so successfully the president's proclamation, and that is indeed what we have been doing month after month.
So, but on this issue of who is in the country, I know practically speaking, it is very difficult to deport, for example, to the country of Venezuela. Donald Trump on the campaign trail talks a lot about a prison gang from that country. And he argues there's already laws in the books that would allow for the Biden administration to dismantle criminal networks. He says he'd do it. Are there those laws? You know, are you doing everything you can to combat this transnational criminal organization?
Yes, we are. And I think you're speaking of Tren de Aragua, TDA. Margaret, I was a prosecutor for 12 years. We had criminal gangs to battle back then. We are indeed doing everything we can to dismantle criminal gangs and transnational criminal organizations. And quite frankly, we've devoted an unprecedented level of resources and personnel and focus to this effort. This is not a new phenomenon, but we are bringing new tools, new capabilities, and new resources to the fight.
Can you quickly explain what the status is with this arrest this past week, or this prosecution we learned of this past week, of this Afghan national who was apparently planning an election day terrorist attack on behalf of ISIS? He was in this country. He had immigration status. Was he radicalized before he came to the United States?
So, Margaret, it is an ongoing prosecution, so I won't speak of the facts, but the viewing public is getting an idea of the breadth and diversity of the missions that we in the Department of Homeland Security
tackle. But it gets to the issue of vetting versus whether he was radicalized here.
Remember, the individual came in through parole, an Afghan national, and when we vet, and we do so intensively, when we vet an individual, it's a point-in-time screening and vetting process. If we obtain information subsequently that suggests the individual could be of danger, we take appropriate law enforcement action. That is exactly what we did in this case.
Understood. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Margaret.
Face the Nation will be back in a minute. Stay with us.
Okay. And the reason why I say what I say about social media is because if you really get to analyzing the things that went on with the White House, shortly after...
That comes before Kamala Harris being the top of our...
Shortly after COVID coming into existence is here in America, It was so chaotic. It was so bizarre and unnatural that it wasn't just people getting into fights in aviation fuselages 20,000 feet above the air towards people getting into fights towards determining whether or not somebody should wear the mask or should not wear the mask, which that was all part of it. But it was stuff like Donald Trump talking about using bleach to cure COVID. That somebody just needed to drink some bleach and maybe it would just go away. Or there was all kinds of stuff. Even Donald Trump got COVID, if you remember, and had to be rushed to the hospital. There was so much confusion. We as individuals here in America was under attack even then. We was under attack
of elections.
And the majority of people didn't even realize just exactly what was going on. Because why? Because they was confused. They had been bamboozled. They didn't know what to think about what was going on. And of course, whenever the government shut itself down, other than primary substances, such as food and etc., that basically took the wind completely out of most of the American people's sails regarding the momentum that we had already done set up through and because of Donald Trump's presidency. Today, we went through what we went through, okay? And whenever it comes to disinformation, whenever it comes to confusion, it's still just as plentiful, if not more plentiful today out there than what it was even during COVID. And until we're willing to sit and look and analyze and come to the conclusion that this is all a supernatural entity, they call it a phenomenon, and it may be. But until we're willing to look and see who the true perpetrator is that's doing this, which is the Luciferian Lucifer, we're only going to be as an animal or a dog chasing after its tail. We'll be moving, but we won't be going nowhere. And I used that again and again and again in some of my other materials regarding where we're at right now. We are at a state of affairs right now to the degree that we could wake up in the morning and see where the earth had opened up and swallowed and killed 1 million people. We're living in the state right now where Yellowstone National Park could blow up. We're living in the state right now that the Santa Rita fault line over in California could go off, or even the New Madrid fault line here in Tennessee and Missouri and parts of Kentucky and Arkansas could devastate this area. We're living in a time to where we could wake up in the morning and see where major forest fires have broken out, and now millions of people is having to be ordered to evacuate. Or we're living in a time to where we don't know if a hurricane comes, if it's going to blast a dozen or more tornadoes out of it, or the flooding is going to just absolutely ravage the land. We are living in uncharted territory. And you may be asking, what's your point in all this, Dennis? We already know that. My point is this. If things would have been handled properly, going back into the late 80s with Ronald Reagan's administration regarding the corporate churches over here that claimed and still claim, they still claim that they're believers in the Bible regarding the Antichrist, the one world government, the New World Order, the opening of the seals, the opening of the 4 horsemen, the 2 witnesses, the teachings from the latter part of Daniel, etc. They still claim that, but yet no. At 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, I'm still getting no cooperation from the people that are still claiming that. So you wonder how come I point my finger at these people and say, you are full of crap. You are lying to yourselves. You are lying to the public. You are lying to the people that you're supposed to be caring about. Because if you truly did believe in the things that you claim that you believe in, there would have already formigated a movement in this area coming from the Windmill Ministries missions. So every time that I see something, regardless whether it's man-made or nature-made, I'm thinking to myself, yep, we're getting a little closer. This is the trajectory that they have set a sail pertaining to the baby boomers, pertaining to the adults that could have taken the bull by the horns going into the late 80s, 30 plus years ago. But today, the generations below them are still following in pursuit of their pursuit. Which tells me that they're all full of you know what, regardless whether they be in their 80s, or 70s, or 60s, or 50s, or 40s, or 30s, or their 20s. And you would think by now, especially those that's in their 20s, that there would have already been some sort of a major mandated movement in response to the Windmill Ministries missions, but even to this day, it's zero. So whenever I make the statements that I make, that we're on a trajectory of doom, I'm not just saying these things to be saying them. This is what I see. This is what I'm interpreting. These are the things that I have experienced and went through for the past 30 plus years since standing out into the eyes of the general public. And proof is in the pudding. I'm a straight shooter. I call it what it is. I mean, if it's white, I call it white. If it's black, I call it black. If it's right, I call it right. If it's wrong, I call it wrong. There's a completely total concept between the differences between peace and war. War and peace. These are two different elements, the same as darkness and light. Good versus evil. And whenever you see a society that is still driven the same drive that it was on 30 plus years ago that it started, and you see that still being trajectory of where we're at today, still being in the same trajectory, why wouldn't I say that we're not all doomed? Why wouldn't I say that it doesn't matter whether or not you was to put the Republicans or the Democrats or both of them in power at the same time, that we're still not going to be able to settle America's problems, much less the problems of the world, pretending to somebody waving a magic wand over America, and all of a sudden our problem's suddenly going to go away. Why wouldn't I think that? Why wouldn't I say that? Because any logical person, I think even a child right now, it don't matter male or female, 7, 8, 10-year-old child, that was to look at this in the way that I'm looking at it, especially knowing as much time and dedication, as much passion that the ministry has put forth, and still not getting no type of positivity out of all this pertaining to supporters. I think even a person blind in one eye and couldn't see out of the other would be able to see these things. Especially knowing that the events that we're witnessing are only getting worse. Not better, but worse. The storms are more intense. They're coming together more frequent. And it doesn't matter. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, COVID should be looked upon as being a storm. As far as I'm concerned, a massive fire out west, or even wherever, should be looked upon as being a storm. As far as I'm concerned, the drug problem that we're under right now here in America, especially with fentanyl, should be looked upon as being a storm. As far as I'm concerned, all the guns pertaining to the gun violence, once more, is another type of storm. These are all different storms that we're under basically attack under. Now, to get the general public to see things the way that I see things, I don't know. I mean, I don't get no response. I don't get nobody stopping at my address or sending me mail or making telephone calls to me toward wanting me to speak or go to a different occasion and function to be a part of that. So because I'm still ostracized, and it's not so much as Dennis James Jackson being ostracized, but it's the things that Dennis James Jackson stands for and has stood for the past 30, now going on 35 plus years. It's no wonder that Dennis Jackson don't shake his head and say to himself, they're full of it. They're all full of it. They're liars, they're cheaters, and they're thieves. Because it was the very thing that happened in the late 80s whenever the White House tried to steal the glorious boom from the glorious God Almighty pertaining to God should have got recognition of ending of the Cold War, pertaining to the falling of the Berlin Wall, pertaining to the reformation of the Atlantic and the Pacific alliances. It was God that should have got that recognition, but never did. But never did. As I said, we are living in a time right now that it would not surprise me if I woke up in the morning and seen where mushroom clouds was falling all over the Middle East, or even mushroom clouds beginning to fall maybe over in Ukraine or over in other parts of the world. It is that frantic. It is that out of control. It is that bizarre. And of course, whenever we put people on TV and they're all smiles and giggles and laughs, it just enforces what I'm talking about towards basically the world being insane. The world being insane. And it's not the world, as my grandmother used to always tell us boys, because we would say, Grandma, the world's gone crazy, the world's gone crazy. And this was back in the 80s or the 90s. And she would look at us and say, son, there's nothing wrong with the world. It's the people in it. And she was nailing it on the head. But what she didn't understand at that time, and which I didn't either, is that because of our arrogantness and because of our activities, now the world is responding the way that we have responded to the world. And because of it, we are seeing things happening to us that in all perspective, we have no one to blame but ourselves. We have no one to blame but ourselves because we have followed the likeness of those that we know are in a trajectory of going in the wrong direction, but we're still following them anyway. So yes, the fault falls upon to the feet of those who could have stopped this, who could have intervened in all this, but did not. And I still say, and I'm going to continue to say, that it's because of their actions or because of their non-actions of what they either should have done or didn't do that they should have done, or vice versa, has put us where we are today. I can't be more explicit in how that I put that. Once more, it wasn't the individual that's talking to you right now and behind the camera that failed the Windmill Ministries missions, but rather it was the public, especially the Christian public, that didn't take the bull by the horns, that failed the ministry. Not the ministry that failed them, because the founder of the ministry done what he was supposed to have done by putting out that information to the world, even though I had to go through the back door to get it out there, even though I had to receive all type of animosity and criticism and all kinds of persecution and prosecution of putting it out there, I still put it out there. I still got the message out there. Now today, as far as I'm concerned, it's still being ignored. Why? Because I've not seen a turnaround. I'm seeing basically the church sector being rallied today the same as I did whenever I first stepped out into the eyes of the general public in 1989, which was zero, zit. That's what I seen then. This is what I'm seeing now. Zero, zit. Now they can talk the talk. White man speaketh with forked tongue about love and grace and peace and all the other stuff. But it's just talk. It's no actions. And in the meantime, we got people on TV that wants to present themselves with all smiles and giggles and laughs, like everything is freaking hunky-dory. I promise you, you can go to the people right now that recently went through what they have went through, and I ain't talking about just within the past 2 weeks. I'm talking about within the past 20 years of devastations that's happened in people's lives, not just in America, but all over the world. And you can walk up to them and approach them in a smiley, hunky-dory, giggly, sniggly way and see how they respond to you. See how they respond to somebody that's full of smirk. You'll be lucky if they don't smack you, because this has been that real and that significant in their lives that it has basically ruined their lives. It has turned their lives completely upside down. And these are the things that our politicians and even the majority of our preachers to this day still cannot comprehend right. So I tend to wonder, what exactly is it going to take? Is it going to take the destruction of mankind before people are going to start to listen and support the person at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255? Or is it completely futile? Well, see, that's what the devil would like to convince people of, that God's message and God's messengers are all futile. That's the trajectory that he's put us on. And for those who are being non-active, or those that are still spreading miscellaneous lies and gossip, you're getting what you deserve. You make your bed hard, you sleep in it. Thing about it is, some people's beds have become so hard to sleep in that they can't even sleep. A matter of fact, in their mind's eye, they would actually be better off dead than to be tormented in this type of a way. Coming near a neighborhood near you. Now, if this is what you want, continue to do what you're doing, and I promise you, it will be coming near a neighborhood near you. Now, if this is not what you want, if you have chosen to want to cut it off at the chase and do something about it, then people need to start responding and reacting in a proper way. Because if not, we're doomed. And I've said that before, and I'll say it again. You have no one to blame other than yourselves.
Is Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, the polling shows already close race has tightened further. Why is that?
Let me start by reminding people just how tight this is. When you look at our estimates across each and every one of the battleground states, one after another is effectively even. So it's a race that either candidate can and may win. But one reason I think this week was highlighted is that you see how differently these candidates and their supporters define what is, not just what ought to be going forward. Let me show you a couple of different examples. Start with the debate over hurricane relief. Trump supporters say that they believe hurricane relief is not going to people impacted by the hurricane. In fact, they accept the claim that FEMA money was diverted to people in the country illegally. And Harris voters say speed of FEMA was just about right and that aid is going to people impacted. But that's just one example. Take another, the economy. Harris voters say that the economy is largely good. They say, or are more likely to say, that the stock market is up this year, that the U.S. has been adding jobs. Trump voters much less likely to say those things. And one more example.
See, they go to the stock market. That is a completely different ruler, a yardstick that is measured off of the rich getting richer off the poor. And that's the part that the working class and the poor people just don't get. Sure, they're getting richer while the rest of us are getting poorer. Now, they don't explain it to you that way because they would like to put it all into the same category as in, well, if they're doing good, everybody else must be doing good too as well, right? Wrong. This is part of that imagery of false information or lies that are distorted, that only tells half of the truth and not the whole truth. And this is the part that's keeping people so agitated and not understanding how come we're getting all these mixed signals, but yet now we're seeing the results of our lives in tangles. It's kind of like the lies that they've been promoting now ever since the Reagan administration done what they done. Well, it's really not a clear choice in making. They're both bad, but we're just going to have to choose between the lesser of the two evils. Well, you can choose between the lesser of the two evils, but guess what? You still chose evil. It don't matter if you did choose the lesser of the two evils, you still chose evil. Evil is evil. Black is black. White is white. Good is good. Evil is evil. And how come people have been misinformed about that? It has to be because of a supernatural entity pertaining to the Antichrist that has went in and reformulated people's thinking and reformulated in the way people resolve things in their minds and in what they're actually hearing and what they're actually experiencing. It's imagery propaganda. And of course, whenever you have the wealthy and the rich, you know, like all them rich people that throwed all them money to all them Hollywood movie stars, throwed all that money to the Democrat Party, going with Harrison, that one day she was a nothing or a nobody, a laughing hyena, to the point that now everybody was going to glorify her because now she had all the solution to all the world's problems. How can people be that naive? It's got to be because they want to be that naive. It's got to be because they want to be blinded. Because if you can't add 2 plus 2 equals 4, just because you tell me that 2 plus 2 equals 3 or 2 plus 2 equals 5 doesn't mean that I have to believe what you're telling me. Especially whenever it comes to fake, phony information out there. So whenever Donald Trump does talk about draining the swamp, I don't think he realizes just exactly how big the swamp is that needs to be drained. It begins with we the people. Those who have been misled. Those who believed in these fairy tales. That now they're realizing, oh my God, this is only just for the chosen few pertaining to the stock market. It ain't talking about all of us, is it? No. Is it even talking about 10% of us? No. Is it even talking about maybe 5% of us? Probably not. Probably be more like 2% of us. May not even be that. Who is spreading these lies? Who's doing this? The 1%ers. The wealthiest of the wealthy. You know why? Because they're the ones that has the big mic. They're the ones that has the big influence, and there's the ones that can spit the propaganda out there to the people to brainwash them. Well, now, people should be able to see the truth, but they're still not seeing the truth. So this goes beyond just 1%ers. This has reached a level of a supernatural entity that has done this and is doing this pertaining to the citizens. This evil entity has basically come in and reformulated the difference between reality and fiction, and now people rather believe fiction than they would reality. Well, this will only go on for a certain length of time, and then whenever it does finally come to its realization, will it be too late? Had we already done walked off into the mouth of the volcano? Is the trajectory of the world to the point that we've already done crossed the Rubicon and there's no going back? I don't know. I don't know, but these are questions that a lot of preachers and a lot of good, sound spiritual people need to sit down and ask themselves, because those will be the ones that will be held accountable for this.
The border. Harris voters say that crossings of the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, are down. Trump voters say that crossings are up. So what that does is it all underpins this idea. It's not just competing ideologies going forward. It's different views of what is right now in the country.
There's no agreed upon set of facts. So,
Exactly.
On things that are measurable, arguably. So if they get their information differently, who do these individuals trust to provide it to them?
We started by asking people how much they use social media. And both camps, both Trump and Harris voters, do use it. They don't necessarily trust everything.
Too many mixed signals. That's what I'm telling you. It keeps people in a hither. It keeps people undecided. It keeps people in the middle of a guess game. And the thing about this guess game, this is not some sort of a Wheel of Fortune. This is the real deal. We're talking about real complications developing in real people's lives. This isn't a fairy tale.
See on it, but one thing they say is that they feel social media makes it easier for them to find people that they agree with. And that's a reminder to everyone, when we look at the role of information, it's not just that people are maybe getting right or wrong things or are steered in a different direction. It's that sometimes they very affirmatively go out and look for things that reinforce existing beliefs. The other part is look at sources of information. For Trump voters, Donald Trump is a trusted source of information, as much as their family and friends, and more than a lot of, let's call them experts. But they're not as trusting across the board of all those things. Whereas Harris voters also trust Harris very much, but they also trust other sources like the ones that I mentioned across the board. One thing we saw that both camps share is they're concerned about foreign interference, that foreign countries are trying to influence them, the voters, to try to steer this election. And what tends to happen is each camp thinks that Iran, China, Russia wants the other candidate to win this. Where all this comes out is when you look ahead, what happens after the results are counted. Donald Trump's voters are more likely than Harris's to say that his camp should challenge the election if he loses, and they're more suspicious that there will be widespread fraud in this election. That's something, talk about different views of what is, that we need to keep an eye on once the race is over.
Interesting. Anthony Salvanto, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment.
Yeah, let's go to this.
Some of the top.
Let's back up. Hope. Go forward. Hope.
Spoke late last week with a group of voters from all 7 battleground states to discuss the election, their outlook for America's future, and more. How many of you voters are going to cast your ballots for Donald Trump? Okay. Mary, you raised your hand. You are in the very important state of Arizona. What's driving your decision?
Well, my decision is I live right on the border in Yuma, Arizona, and I know in the last 3.5 years we have had just horrible problems in Yuma with a lot of illegal immigration coming through. Our economy is awful. Yuma's unemployment is 16%, so the economy is a big factor as well. Just a combination of things. Our groceries have gone up. Just everything has just really gone downhill in the last 3.5 years for us in Yuma and Arizona completely.
And she didn't make mention that the heat's become more intense. The heat's now longer than what it was. People's having resort towards buying 2 and 3 air conditioners to be able to maintain. Their light bill, their utility bills are much more expensive. I could go on and on and on. Medications are higher, gas is higher, etc. This is all hit a great deal of the American people blindsidedly, that now we're beginning to awaken to this, but is it too late?
Cole, you are in Georgia, also a very key state. Why do you plan to vote for Donald Trump?
For me, I do not look necessarily at the candidate specifically, but just the broader party and the direction they're hoping to take America. For me, some of the top 3 issues would definitely be our economy, immigration, and then I would also say, as we've come out of the pandemic, just seeing how the 2 different political parties handled the pandemic, I think Kamala Harris and the Democrats are a little bit too extreme on the issue of abortion. I do not support the idea of allowing abortion at 20 weeks of pregnancy, and certainly not with no restrictions. And so I would prefer candidates who are more aligned with my pro-life position.
Mike, you're in Nevada. You said you will be voting for Donald Trump, but he makes it hard. He makes it hard for you to feel good about that vote. Can you explain what you mean?
You know, there's parts of Donald Trump which I admire and parts of Donald Trump which I cringe, for lack of a better term. And, you know, when in the debate, when he said, you know, they just asked him, January 6th, would you change anything? I think he had an opportunity there to step up as a leader and take some ownership. People went to jail, and I think that would have showed a lot of courage for him to do that. So I like things on the economy, tightening up inflation. Yes, and yes. You know, I think those are the primary issues in this election. You know, as you get into the periphery and just how, you know, he conducts himself, sometimes it's hard to put a Trump side in the front yard based on some of his behaviors.
But you're still doing it. Why?
Well, because I'm a fan of the economy and a fan of success, right? I think there has been no driver in the driver's seat in our economy for the last 3.5 years, and I think we've suffered mightily for it. That drives a lot for me. I don't have to like people personally. I don't have to agree with some of the stuff they do, but I have to, kind of go for the greater good.
Christopher, you are in.
Going for the greater good sounds good. That sounds good, right? But how come people's little finite minds can only think about what's went on in the past 3.5 years? And how come people such as myself can see the beginning phases of all this, looking at all the dots and not just a few of them, going back 35 years ago, whenever it was the Republican Party that steered the American people in the wrong direction to begin with? And then the Democrat Party followed pursuit. And then here come the Democrats again, and then here come the Republicans again, and here come the Democrats again, and here come the Republicans again, which has put us all in jeopardy. And you wonder how come I say that neither party is
always been enthusiastic.
Is eligible for my vote?
I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980. I've been fortunate enough to be part of Trump's ground campaign in 2016, and I met some very amazing people. I really, really like the maturation process that he's gone through. He got his feet wet in 2016. He learned the hard way. He got tagged a few times. He stepped in it a lot. It's easy to look in the rearview mirror and say could have, should have, and would have. But when you're in the moment, you make the best decisions you can at the time. I trust him to do that. I trust him to make a decision.
But do you, Christopher, ever feel uncomfortable, like Mike said he did, with things that Donald Trump says?
At sometimes I have, but in this day and age, with what we're being faced with, on the global stage, and the not so nice characters that will look for a weak spot in the United States of America to bring her to her knees, I'd rather have in the ocean full of bloody water great white sharks, I'd rather have an orca in there than Flipper protecting me. And I know Donald Trump will get in there and he will fight for us. He may not say what we want to hear, but he will execute on our behalf. And it's obvious. The man nearly died. He took a bullet for us. He got back up again. And you cannot dismiss that. And his instinct was to say, fight. So that right there tells me this man doesn't have to be there.
How many of you are planning to vote for Vice President Harris in November? I want to dive into exactly why that is. Linda, and then Kathy, why are you supporting Vice President Harris for president?
I've first voted for Reagan in 80 as well. And all of my voting years, I was told character counts. And as I look at Donald Trump, I either have to say character counts and not vote for him, or say it doesn't count anymore. I did vote for him in 2016. I voted for Joe Biden in 2020, and I will vote for Kamala Harris this year.
That's interesting that you voted for Trump, then Biden, now you're going to vote for Harris. These are very different people. What is driving your decision now?
I have listened to Kamala Harris and the things she has to say. I truly believe she cares about people. I think her life shows she cares about people. And she truly wants to work to make our day in and day out lives better now. And I care about now, but I have grandchildren, and I care about what kind of a world we're going to give them to build on as they become people to vote in the next few years. And again, I go back to character counts, and Donald Trump is a proven liar. He has said and done too many things that I think should be disqualifying, from January 6th to those poor people in Springfield, Ohio. They must just be terrified.
Kathy, you're in Pennsylvania. Why are you voting for Vice President Harris?
I hear and see the fears that people have just contemplating another 4 years with Donald Trump. I don't have anything that I can think of that I would say I agree with him on. And I, like Linda, would say, to me, character counts. So Donald Trump is a no for me.
What about you, Mauricio? You are joining us from Wisconsin.
January 6th to me is beyond unacceptable. That's sacred territory that was stormed. He riled up that. It was not a protest. That was an insurrection. The plans were to overthrow a legitimate election. That will never be tolerated in my viewpoint.
Do you believe that Vice President Harris, if she is elected president, that she will be very different from Joe Biden? Or do you see her continuing the issues and agenda that he has pursued for the past 4 years?
I'm sure she's probably a little bit more liberal, but she would accept the results if she lost. And that's big to me.
Linda, back to the original question.
The direction that we're going in right now, that individual just got through talking about January the 6th being not acceptable. In one perspective, I can understand what he's talking about, but in another perspective, on the trajectory that we're on, eventually, people's going to look at January the 6th and say, my God, I wish that we would had implemented or moved or been a part more of January the 6th that would have prevented from us going in the direction of where we're heading to right now. In other words, they can stonewall it all they want to and say, well, it never should have happened. And in some analogies, I can understand the reason why people would say that. Because basically it did get out of hand. But this thing has been out of hand now all along. And to think that one candidate or the other is going to be able to put it back together again, they're absolute fools by believing that. This is the reason why that I say neither candidate is worthy of my vote, because of what that they have done in the past. Looking at their past record and what that they have been a part of, because you can't blame just one party by saying, oh, this is the reason why that we're $35 trillion in debt is because of this particular group or that particular group. It's all of them. It's all of them. And until you can understand that and see that, then obviously you're being led in the direction that these politicians wants to lead you, or even these preachers, these lukewarm people. And that's the reason why the Bible talks about that. It talks about in the first three chapters of Revelations that God is expressing himself very clearly, that I am the one who scattered the reins in the hearts of humanity, and repent, or else I will throw thee off into a sick bed. Well, we've been in a sick bed now over here in America now for years, and now it's really showing up toward just exactly how sick that we really are. But the next step beyond that step is, I will throw thee off into great tribulation. You don't think that them people, after them going through what they went through over here in North Carolina and East Tennessee, you don't think that they're going through great tribulation right now? Sure they are. You don't think certain people that went through what they went through down in Florida, especially being hit twice, you don't think that they don't think that they're going through great tribulation? Sure they are. You don't think the people that had to evacuate and their houses got burned out west, that now they're having to start all over again, are people out in Boulder, Colorado that had over 1,000 units to get burnt 2 or 3 days right before Christmas about 4 or 5 years ago? You don't think that their lives are looked upon in their mind's eye and saying, we are in tribulation? Sure they are. Sure they are. And until people awaken to that, it's coming near a neighborhood near you.
Candidates to be that specific.
At the federal level, and the reason why it was brought back to the states is that different states have different feelings. California is much more liberal than Arizona or Texas or Oklahoma or Georgia or other areas of the country. And just like Trump said, look at Kansas. Kansas has become more liberal than they used to be. Mm-hmm. And that's very true. But the main focus is women's health. Women and what's taught in schools, nothing anymore.
Kathy, you raised your hand. That this is an issue that's important to you.
It is. I have daughters and granddaughters, and I would hope that the decision of something that serious would be allowed to be made by them and their healthcare provider, not by someone sitting on a bench or in a boardroom or wherever, making that decision for them to be able to or not to be able to control their own body. And it's not realistic to believe if you like this liberal law better, everyone can just move where they want to. Those things just aren't realistic.
You can see the extended interview on our YouTube page or our website. We'll be right back.
And this is the part that people don't understand. It's not about liberal laws. It's not about what state that you live in. It's not about what country that you live in. It's based upon God's laws. Does God say it's permittable? Does God say it's acceptable? Does God promote the fact of doing it or not to do it? And once you lose sight of that northern star that even Obama reflects to a great deal of times, once you lose sight of that northern star, then all the rest of this stuff is all a bunch of malarkey. And that's what it's turning into. And you know who sees this? Communist-controlled countries like Russia, China, and other authoritarian countries see this, that America is losing its grip. And the reason why America is losing its grip is because America has walked away from the true identity of a holy, righteous, eternal God. And until we understand that and are willing to go back and clean our platter again regarding God Almighty, we're going to continue to be like that dog chasing after its tail, going around and around in circles. It's moving. It's moving. But in reality, is it going anywhere? It ain't going nowhere. It's just going around and around in circles. And that's what America's been doing now for the past 30 some odd years. And it's going to continue to do that for the next 30 some odd years until we actually see a divine, spiritual, real revival, revolutionary movement. Until then, people such as myself, I'll make my videos, I'll put it out on my social media. In the meantime, I'm hunkering down. I'm getting ready for the inedible pertaining to the worst case scenario, because I've tried to help them. Obviously, they didn't want my help. They denied my help. They didn't want me fighting for them or being a leader for them. And because of it, they've gotten what they deserve. Beginning right here in Northwest Tennessee in the White House. Beginning right here in the continent of the United States. And like I said, it may take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, the direction that we're going, but eventually there's going to be people that's going to look back at all this and they're going to say, my God, I wish that January the 6th was the worst thing that could have ever happened to us. Because once you go through something that's quadrupling a billion zillion times worse than January the 6th, to the point of actual bloodshed, civil war, then people will say, my God, January the 6th wasn't that bad of a deal after all, now was it? But now, I guess it's going to take that harshness to fall upon a society before they actually start accepting that and looking at that way. I don't know. That's the reason why I say I think they're bamboozled. I think they're deceived. I think they're doomed. And until we see a true spiritual revival, a revolution, we're going to keep going down the same old path that's going to be doom and gloom and more hardship and despair. It's all based around evil wanting to dominate good instead of good dominating evil. And you can smear it up, you can color it up, you can put mascara on it, you can do whatever you want to with it, you can put all the perfume on it you want. But whenever it's all said and done with, once you go back down to the core, what does the core actually look like? Those was the factors that Jesus preached on pertaining to the cup, pertaining to the malt, pertaining to your own wickedness from within. You can use camouflage techniques all you want, but ultimately in the end it will be God that will know who you are, what you are, and what's inside. Good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us, because we're like 3 weeks away from this next presidential election. Hopefully this election won't turn out to be the worst case nightmare or the worst case scenario, but it could very well do that, and if it does, is our government officials, is our state officials, is our local officials, are they prepared for that? Are they preparing for that? I don't know. We can't even prepare ourselves for an oncoming hurricane, or for an oncoming fire, or some of these other forces of nature, natural catastrophes that hit us. We can't even prepare ourselves for that. So do you really think that we're going to be prepared in case all hell was to bust loose the day of or the day after the presidential election? This is probably what our enemy is waiting on. Our enemy is laying wait. Our enemy is out to kill, steal, and destroy our adversary. And whenever Brezhnev said what he said, that we'll take the American people over and never fire a shot, they was hoping that we would fall apart from within. They was hoping that we would basically become so overwhelmingly corrupt from within that we would basically destroy ourselves. And who knows, their hopes may very well be right around the corner, especially if we do not see a different trajectory, a different movement. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors towards where we go from this moment on. Let's listen to what the president's got to say right here pertaining to the storm damage down in looks like St. Pete Beach, Florida. Let's listen to what he's got to say here, please.
$1 million to 6 new cutting-edge projects to support communities impacted by Hurricane Helene and Milton. This funding will not only restore power, but will make the region's power system stronger and more capable, and reduce the frequency and duration of power outages, while extreme weather events become more frequent.
We've got reporters and analysts in place across this country. They're ready to cover all these developing storylines for us. And we're going to start with NBC's senior political editor, Mark Murray, who has a breakdown of today's new NBC News poll numbers. Mark, first question, what's your biggest takeaway with this one? Look, this race is close. Does anyone have an advantage with 23 days to go?
Yeah.
And shalom. And shalom. Heaven help us all.